I would like now to yield to the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you very much. Let me just thank you for yielding. And also, I'd like to commend you for having taken the initiative and the leadership to convene this opportunity for us to discuss what I consider to be one of the great issues of our day. As a matter of fact, it's amazing how much similarity there is when you think about how people think and how they act and how they react. And I know that I, for one, I'm pleased that we were able to have averted a real showdown up to this point. And I think that certainly Kofi Annan, who has demonstrated a level of diplomacy that we have not recently seen in terms of the ability to wade through different countries, different issues, different items, and at least for the moment, we're not engaged in a shooting war. I also think it's interesting to note that whenever people talk about the issue, I was able to convene a town hall meeting on Monday evening at the University of Illinois. And it's interesting that not one single person there had the idea that we ought to go racing off. As a matter of fact, they were all pleased that there had been a level of constraint. And they were all raising their voices to President Clinton and to Madeleine Albright, saying, let's keep talking, let's keep negotiating, let's continue to look and see if there isn't a way to avert this crisis, that as long as there is a sliver of hope, let's find that hope and let's have the alternative, and let's not put the American people in the predicament where we would have to know that because some innocent child lived down the road from Saddam Hussein, or some elderly citizen who had no interest in moving towards war had to be maimed, hurt, or killed because of our inability to find a peaceful solution. And I think people like yourself who talk about peace and who talk about alternatives, we know it's difficult. I mean, peace has never been easy. I mean, I'm told, I grew up sort of in the traditional Christian experience, and we were led to believe that at one time there were only 4 people on the earth, Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and it seems as though they had some difficulty. One thought that the other one had something that was his or that he ought to have. And only 4 people, yet some friction. I think if we try and live in movement towards peace, it can be obtained. I'm reminded of something that I believe John Kennedy was supposed to have said, that peace is not really found in treaties, covenants, and charters, but in the hearts and souls of men and women. And that if we actually look for a way, if people all over the world can believe that there is the opportunity to peacefully coexist, and if we can use our resources to find solutions to the major problems that plague our earth, rather than using those to create and develop weapons of war, then perhaps we can find a cure for cancer. Perhaps we can indeed find a way to eradicate hunger, or we can find a way to make people healthy, to create the kind of quality of life that we're looking for. And so again, I commend you for taking out the time, for giving the rest of us the opportunity to share and to participate. And I believe that if people continue to pursue, as you're doing, as difficult as it might be, we can ultimately find a peaceful solution to the world's problem. So I thank you and yield back.
I thank you very much for participating. Early on, I talked about a policy of non-intervention, and I would like to talk a little bit more about that because some might construe that if you have a policy of non-intervention, it means you do not care, and that is not the case. Because we can care a whole lot, and there's two very important reasons why one who espouses the constitutional viewpoint of non-intervention, they do it. One is we believe in the rule of law, and we should do it very cautiously, and that's what we're bound by here in the Congress, so that's very important. But the other one is a practical reason, and that is that there's not very good evidence that our intervention does much good. We do not see that intervention in Somalia has really solved the problems there, and we left there in a hurry. We have spent a lot of money in Bosnia and the other places, so the evidence is not very good that intervention is involved. And certainly the most abhorrent type of intervention, which is the eager and aggressive and not well thought out military intervention. That is obviously the very worst. And I would argue that even a policy of neutrality and friendship and trade with people, regardless of the enemy, it would be the best. Of course, if you're involved in a war or there's an avowed enemy, a declared enemy, that's a different story. But for the most part, since World War II, we have not used those terms. We have not had declared wars. We have only had, quote, police actions, and therefore we are working in a never limbo that nobody can well define. And I think it's much better that we define the process, that everybody understands it. I would like to go ahead and close with a brief summary of what we've been trying to do here today. It was mentioned earlier, and I want to re-emphasize it. Something that has not been talked about a whole lot over this issue has been the issue of oil. It is oil interest, money involved. As I stated earlier, we were allies with Hussein when we encouraged him to cross the border into Iran, and yet at the same time the taking over of the Kuwait oil fields was something that we could not stand, even though there has not been a full debate over that argument. We've heard only the one side of that, who drew the lines and for what reason the lines were drawn there and whose oil was being drilled, and there is a major debate there that should be fully aired before we say that is it a fault of only one. But it isn't so much that it was the crossing of borders. I do believe that oil interests and the huge, very, very important oil fields of Iraq and what it might mean to the price of oil if they came on has a whole lot to do with this. We did not worry about the Hutus and the Tutus in Africa. A lot of killing was going on there. 1 million people were killed. But where was our compassion? Where was our compassion in the killing fields of Cambodia? We did not express the same compassion that we seem to express as soon as oil is involved. And we cannot let them get away with the repetition of, we got to get the weapons of mass destructions. Of course, but are they mostly in Iraq? I would say that we have done rather well getting rid of the weapons there. They are a much weaker nation militarily than they were 10 years ago, and those kind of weapons are around the world. So that, as far as I'm concerned, is a weak argument. And another subject that is not mentioned very often, but the Prime Minister of Israel just recently implied that hopefully we will pursue this policy of going in there and trying to topple this regime. And I can understand their concerns, but I also understand the concerns of the American taxpayers and the expense of the American lives that might be involved. So I can argue my case. But even taking it from an Israeli point of view, I don't know how they can be sure it's in their best interests to go over there and stir things up. I mean, they're more likely to be bombed with a terrorist bomb if we go in there and we start bombing Iraq. And if we do, Israel will not stand by as they did once before. They have told us so. So if we bomb first and then the goal of Saddam Hussein is to expand the war, what does he do? He lobs one over into Israel, and then Israel comes in, and then the whole procedure has been to solidify the Islamic fundamentalists. And then there's no reason not to expand expect maybe Iran and Syria coming in. Right now, Iraq is on closer ties with Syria and Iran than they've been in 18 years. This is the achievement of our policy. We're driving the unity of those who really hate America and would do almost anything. So we further expose ourselves to the threat of terrorism. So if they're attacked and they have no way to defend themselves against a great nation of ours, they will strike out. And therefore, I think in a practical argument, we have very little to gain by pursuing this policy. But it is not difficult for me to come down on the side of arguing for peace. Peace is what we should be for. That does not mean you give up your military, but you use your military more wisely than we have over the past 30 or 40 years. You use it for national defense. Today, we have a powerful military force, but a lot of people don't think we are as strong in defense as we used to be. So yes, we're stronger than others, but if we have a failed and a flawed policy and a military that has been weakened, then we're looking for trouble. So even the practical arguments call for us for restraint and a sensible approach, debate and negotiations. And it's for this reason, I think, for the moment, we can be pleased that Mr. Annan went to Iraq, came back with something that is at least negotiable and that the American people will think about and talk about. And hopefully this will lead not only to peace immediately in this area, but hopefully it will lead to a full discussion about the wisdom of a foreign policy of continued perpetual interventionism and involvement in the internal affairs of other nations. If we argue our case correctly, we argue the moral argument, we argue the constitutional argument, and we argue the argument for peace as well. I cannot see how the American people cannot endorse a policy like that, and I challenge those who think that we should go carelessly and rapidly into battle, killing those who are not responsible, further enhancing the power and the authority of those who would be the dictators. They do not get killed. Sanctions don't hurt them. The innocent people suffer. Just as the economic sanctions that will be put on Southeast Asia as we give them more money, who suffers from the devaluations? The people, the American taxpayer, as well as the poor people, whether they're in Mexico or Southeast Asia, in order to prop up the very special interests. Whether it's the banking interests that are involved with the loans to the Southeast Asians, or whether it's our military-industrial complex that tend to benefit from building more and more weapons so that they can go off and test them in wars that are unnecessary. I yield back the balance of my time.